Hey guys, this is Prasoon, a second year medical student, and in this video I will review every single book, video resource, lecture, etc. that I've come across in first year of medical school. That is in anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. Disclaimer, more than 50 resources have been discussed in this video, so buckle up your seatbelt for a long but informative video. But don't worry, you don't have to read all of them, although most of the resources that we are going to discuss are the best in class in what they do. However, not all of them fall under the must have or must to do category. But I admit that all of them are good to have books, so yeah, it's better if you go through all of them. And yeah, MBBS is hard, I know that. Before starting, I would like to say that it takes a hell lot of effort to make one of these, so I would be really grateful if you can give a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Now believe me or not, anatomy is going to take most of your time, both in the first year of medical school and also for this video. In this anatomy section, we are first going to discuss the gold standard books of anatomy, then we will go for professional exam oriented books, then we will discuss various lectures, video resources and other resources, and finally I will end this anatomy section by mentioning a shortcut method just to pass the exams and the must have books of anatomy. Then we will go for the physiology and biochemistry sections. Let's first talk about the gold standard books of anatomy, starting with Gray's Anatomy for Students. Gray's Anatomy for Students is a simplified version of the Bible of Anatomy, Gray's Anatomy, otherwise called the Mother Grace. They have entirely removed the histology and embryology section from the Grace and have cut a huge chunk of theory from regional anatomy to make it more appealing to the UG students, like to make it more undergraduate friendly, and they have more than succeeded to do so. The book comprises of an excellently presented gross anatomy theory that's very easy to understand and visualize. The text flows like a story when read properly, and the diagrams make it even better to understand but harder to forget because pictorial memory remains longer than just words. In fact, Gray's Anatomy is what you will get when you mix a best in class theory with a really good atlas. So much so that you may not need an atlas if you have read a chapter from Gray's other than from revision purposes. Apart from that, there is a significant emphasis on clinical anatomy in the form of clinical skills separated in blue boxes after every small topic. The importance on clinical anatomy is further emphasized when 8 to 12 real patient cases with their diagnosis, treatment and abnormalities have been presented after every chapter. I don't know why, but some students claim that Gray's Anatomy is not everyone's cup of tea and it is much more harder to comprehend and retain than BDC or Vishram Singh. I'm sorry, but if you are thinking something on the lines of that, then your approach to anatomy itself is wrong. Anatomy is very less about memorization and very much more about visualization. Like this is a diagram illustrating the epiploic foramen from BDC and from Gray's Anatomy. Which one do you think is easier to understand? I don't know why this is a thought in people's mind. What I am saying is BDC is not a bad book, but students are using it really badly. It is not made keeping conceptual understanding as its first priority. The non-standard books have been made to help memorize various facts to write down in the exam. That is why the diagrams are not only more representable in the exams, but at the same time less visual for obvious reasons. But also the point-wise theory is not for someone who is reading anatomy for the first time, but for someone who wants to make out the answer of a long answer question out of the topic. Then why do so many students, almost 90% of students of India, take these non-standard books as their textbooks? Well, the answer is just one word: time. See, using gold standard books, you can develop a much better understanding of the subject, and that too without much effort and time as it would take to develop such a understanding from non-standard books. But this will not get you a distinction in exams as such. You have to couple them with non-standard books to get real good marks in exams. That's why most students are leaning more towards non-standard books as their single solution to every problem. They can develop an okayish understanding of the subject and score really good marks in the exams. But yeah, that's the gist of Gray's versus BDC, and in my opinion, you should follow Gray's as your textbook and use BDC during the exams to make out the answers of the questions asked in university exams. The requirement of an atlas becomes evident when you have to revise an entire chapter of anatomy in a short time, which you will need to do a lot even after first year. But you don't necessarily need an atlas if you have used Gray's as your textbook and have paid a close attention during dissection classes or have watched dissection videos on YouTube. Having said that, there are two atlas that students use: Nettus Atlas and Themes Atlas. Well, Nettus looks a bit more unrealistic and cartoonish than themes. Basically, they are just diagrams only they are not real dissection images, while theme is basically a collection of labeled pictures of dissected body parts. Netters wins the battle in terms of being easy to understand and revise during exams, which is the purpose of an atlas. Also, Netter has a lot more diagrams than themes, making it a better option. I consider Snell's Clinical Anatomy as a book of torture for visual learners. Like, I tried reading both Snell's and Moore's Clinical Anatomy for the upper limb chapter and found Moore to be way more engaging and interesting than Snell's because of the diagrams, which make it even more easier to understand and remember. I'm not saying that Snell's is useless, just that Moore's is a better alternative. So how should you read Moore's Clinical Anatomy? Well, first you need to know why it's important to read a separate clinical anatomy textbook. Fact is that Gray's Anatomy has every single clinical case covered that you need to know in first year. So we are reading these clinical anatomy textbooks even after going through our standard textbooks, mainly for the sake of revision and extension of knowledge on the abnormalities that we have already an idea about. So you don't want to give lots of time to Moore's, unlike what you would have done to Gray's. So no need to go for the theory part, jump straight to the clinical blue boxes and try to understand every single abnormality, keeping the time limit in mind. In my case, I used to cover a chapter of the book in a single day, so it took me only 10 days to cover the entire book. Given the little amount of time that needs to be spent, I can guarantee that the output is something great, and you should definitely cover this book. Having said that, this book has its fair share of mistakes. Like here, the percentage of male breast cancer patients have been mentioned to be 5%, while in reality it's less than 1.5% of all breast cancers. And believe me or not, this is quite a major mistake as far as medical information is concerned. So there are two big players when it comes to neuroanatomy. There's the extremely concise but still engaging Vishram Singh's Clinical Neuroanatomy, and there is the Bible of Neuroanatomy, Snell's Clinical Neuroanatomy. And trust me, if every first year medical student had enough time for Snell's, then Vishram Singh won't even make it to the list. But the fact of the matter is, time is extremely limited in first year. Like we had barely 8 months before the Profs, and for us trying to cover Snell's is just like trying to cover Mother Grace in first year. So Vishram Singh does the job by elaborating the theory in a very easy to understand but still concise format, making it even easier to revise the whole book, which trust me you will do a lot since neuroanatomy is a bit more volatile than the other regional anatomy subjects. This brings us to the major downside of Vishram Singh, that is the lack of elaborative diagrams. See, neuroanatomy is all about visualization through imagination, because you can't see most of the functional correlations of the CNS through dissections, so you need really good diagrams to go with it. To solve this problem, you can use YouTube for 3D animations and stuff that I have discussed later in this video in the coming sections. Also, this is an important difference to highlight between Snell's and Vishram Singh. Snell's has a lot of clinical questions after every chapter, but Vishram Singh has only a bunch of them. But the questions in Vishram Singh are well structured so that every question focuses on the key highlights of the chapter. Okay, coming to embryology, Langman is no doubt the best book of embryology. Not only that, it is very exam friendly also, like you can make your short and long answers from this book. The theory is excellent and very easy to understand, but you can take the help of certain video lectures and 3D animations to understand and visualize how the development is taking place, because the diagrams are a bit lacking. Also, standard books like Langman are always preferred to non-standard books like IB Singh because they give an insight on cutting edge research. For example, in digestive system, it has been explained that how the previous concept of intraperitoneal and primary and secondary retroperitoneal organs is so wrong, as proved by recent molecular advances. So it gives you a broad point of view about how the medical field is constantly evolving with recent advances in molecular research. Okay, histology is all about planets. I mean the slides that you see through the microscope. That means there is a very little difference between an atlas and a textbook in histology, because all you need to do is observe and understand the diagrams. Diffure's Atlas of Histology is hands down the best collection of histological pictures of slide. It also has short sections of theory to go with it, and that will be sufficient both for the exams and in the knowledge point of view. Students also follow IB Singh for more theory of histology, but I will advise against it. Better divert that time to something more useful. You don't need any book for genetics in first year. Your NEET prep should be enough. I did refer to Emery's Elements of Medical Genetics for some clinical understanding, but your class notes may bridge that gap for you. For dissection classes, you would be advised to bring your Cunningham Manual of Dissection, but trust me, it is utterly useless in first year. So we used to borrow them from our seniors and lend them to our juniors instead of buying them. Like the first 30 pages of the manual are really important and interesting, but just those 30 pages and the topic of spinal nerves is the only thing you would ever read out of these 3 books combined. For understanding the difference between the standard and non-standard books, let me introduce you to something that I call the 70-30 criteria. The standard books are 70% concept build-up and 30% exam oriented, while the non-standard books are the complete reverse, 30% concept build-up and 70% exam oriented. And just with this criteria in mind, you can understand the respective use cases of these books. As I have already said while elaborating on grades, using non-standard books for concept build-up is a very grave mistake which will eat lots of your time and a bit of your concepts. Okay, my camera just went up, so I am recording it the very next day. As I was saying, it requires a lot of memorization to answer the long answer and short notes of professional exams, and BD Chaurasia is like the book that is made for university exams. So the subheading wise distribution of the topics on which questions are crafted upon in the exams makes it the go-to book for the exams. It's not like you will fail the exams if you have done just the conceptual part right from the Gray's Anatomy and skipped BDC altogether, but it's very difficult to get an above average score. It's like everyone else has the cheat to the exam questions in the form of tabulated theory presented in BDC, while you don't have that. On top of that, the diagrams in BDC are easy to draw in exams and a must for the exams. Like, you cannot draw the diagrams from Gray's because they are not representative diagrams. Additionally, if you have read anatomy properly throughout the year, it hardly takes 3 days to cover all the important topics of each section of anatomy. The sections being upper limb, lower limb, thorax, abdomen, pelvis, and head and neck. I'm leaving neuroanatomy out because it is not the best book to read neuroanatomy from. Okay, the 3 days for each section that I mentioned, it is possible only if you go after the important topics of each section. Otherwise, it will be too voluminous to handle before the exam. Seniors help a lot in selection of the important topics because it is variable from universities to universities. But you can just Google the important topics of anatomy, physiology and biochemistry for first year professional exams. Because the variation between universities is not that significant in first year. Though the best way is to sort them out yourself using the 15 years of previous year questions. By the way, start with BDC at least a month before exams. You can start even earlier to cover the lesser important topics, but it at least takes 20 to 30 days to cover the important topics from all chapters from BDC, as chapters like abdomen and pelvis are going to take much more time than chapters like upper limb or lower limb. Again, this is a reminder, if anyone wants to use BDC as their textbook of gross anatomy for first year, then go for it, because that is what 90% students of India do. All I am saying is there is a better approach to anatomy that makes it more efficient, interesting and useful for the years to come. Okay, here is a quick look at BD Chaurasia's regional anatomy. So the book series of BDC is a collection of 1 book of general anatomy and 4 books of regional anatomy. So this 1 book of general anatomy is also divided according to the competency syllabus as well as the regional anatomy books. So that is a plus side of BDC. These are the contents of the general anatomy textbook, and here comes the theory. So general anatomy is not much useful for the exams because you would already know these topics. Then this is how a regional anatomy book looks like. This is for head and neck, and this is a chapter from the book. So here is a chapter of abdomen from BDC. As you can see, each chapter is subdivided into sub-chapters, and each sub-chapter, for example the stomach sub-chapter, is again subdivided into small topics that make it very easy to represent in the exams. Even the diagrams are very easy to draw in the exams. So that is why this book becomes a necessity when it comes to professional exams. And the histology section has also been mentioned here, so you don't need to go for diffuse for special histology preparation. You can also see after every chapter there is a mnemonic section that is really useful. For example, this mnemonic is about the Meckel's diverticulum and its position and its importance. And there are facts to remember, that is basically the summary of the chapter. And then there is a clinico-anatomical problem. And lastly, there are some questions after every chapter of different types, but they are not of such good quality, so they are not as useful. Having said all that about BDC, some students prefer using Vishram Singh for the head neck chapter because it has diagrams that are easier to understand, comprehend and represent in the exams, especially in this chapter of head neck. But if you have done Gray's right, then the subpart diagrams of BDC won't be much of a problem for you because you have already got the visualization right. As mentioned before, the only section you shouldn't read from BDC for the exams is neuroanatomy, because Vishram Singh's clinical neuroanatomy, which has been discussed in the gold standard textbooks section of this video, is more than sufficient for the profs. Like, you don't need a separate exam oriented book. Similarly, for histology and embryology, the textbooks of Diffure and Lagman would be more than enough for the exams. And as mentioned before, for genetics you don't even need to read books, your lecture notes are sufficient. Let's now talk about some questions question books of anatomy, there is one book called Gray's Anatomy Review, which has very interesting questions. It is a book to be used after reading the text from Gray's Anatomy, as it tests your clinical anatomy skills to its fullest through excellently crafted questions which scale up from being easy, medium to mind-boggling questions. Overall, it's just a great source of clinical anatomy questions. The second question cum review book that I'm going to recommend is First Aid. It is famously known as the single most important resource for USMLE preparation, but it is much more than that for first year students. Even if you are not interested for USMLE preparation, it is one of the best review books of anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. Let's now talk about lectures, dissection videos and other resources. The reason I recommend watching lectures is because the course in anatomy is very diverse, and in most of the cases we spend a lot of time in not so important topics. For example, it is common for a first year student to know the origin and insertion of lumbricals, but they would forget about the lesions at various levels of brachial plexus. So these lectures help in streamlining us to the clinically important topics in anatomy. Apart from that, they are a gift to the visual learners also. Having said that, I thoroughly believe that books remain an indispensable part of MBBS curriculum. Let's now talk about the best paid as well as free resources of videos and lectures available. Marrow and Prep Ladder still remain the industry leaders in the NEET PG Prep apps, soon to be renamed as Next PG Prep apps, I guess. Some other resources providing great video lecture materials are Kaplan, which is more concise and USMLE oriented, Lecturio and Doctor in Training, which are more medical school guides instead of exam prep apps, and Boards and Beyond, which is nowadays considered like the ultimate USMLE prep resource. But since anatomy is not a deal breaker in USMLE, only the important topics have been given due weightage in Boards and Beyond. But our goal is to use these resources to gain knowledge and not to qualify for USMLE, right? So personally, I thought Lecturio is more close to the lectures that we have in our medical colleges, while Kaplan is taking a completely clinically oriented approach to anatomy, which I am absolutely a fan of. The only downside is that they are extremely expensive, so much so that you have to look for a jugaad. For me, I used my seniors accounts, but students generally see the Telegram app as their lifesaver. Okay, finding embryology difficult to understand or haven't read embryology at all and the exam is in 2 days, then no worries, because this YouTube channel comes to the rescue. It is called Life in the Womb by Dr. Rose. Students in our college have literally used this as the only resource for embryology preparation before the professional exams. So this channel is definitely a complete package for embryology. Moving on, neuroanatomy blended with neurophysiology has not been explained as easily as Najib sir does in his videos. He will start right from the basics and build up on it until you are thorough with the subject. He doesn't have lectures on all the topics of first year of MBBS for anatomy, but some of his notable ones are on neuroanatomy, embryology and head and neck, which are a bless to any student who finds these topics difficult. The only downside being the length of the lectures, considering that the ECG lectures went on for 10 hours or more. So do use features like 2x speed or skip 15 seconds really well while watching the lectures to manage your time efficiently. Najib sir also has a YouTube channel where he uploads some free videos, but his full subscription brings upon a plethora of videos that are not in the free YouTube channel, and given the little amount of money that they charge for the subscription, I would recommend buying that. A very similar resource to Dr. Najib's videos is Ninja Nerds lectures on YouTube. These videos are like gems in the form of free content. They only make videos on important topics, but they explain it really well considering the vertical and horizontal integration. The next YouTube channel that I would recommend is Dr. G. Vanu Prakash for animated neuroanatomy portions to get a better picturization of the subject. It is often said that cadaver is the best teacher of anatomy, and in today's age you don't even need to revisit the cadaver lab or dissection lab to revise a subject from the best teacher itself, as you can watch dissection videos on YouTube. I personally believe that these videos are even better than the atlas because they let you see the real thing and educate yourself about each and every part of the human body from the body itself. Like in the past 2 or 3 years, dissection videos have flooded YouTube, and no matter what the topic, you can find a dissection video on that. My advice would be never to skip on these videos when you are reading a topic. Some of the best resources of these would be Mitesh Dev's channel, Viva of Anatomy, Sanjoy Sinhal's channel, Dissection of Human Body for Head and Neck, and Viren Karya's Osteology. For me, I used to watch dissection videos from Mitesh Dev's channel after our dissection class, except for the chapter of head and neck, where I think the channel of Dissection of Human Body has better videos. Then I got some time to watch Sanjay Sinha's dissection videos, which are much more clinically and surgically oriented, given his background in surgery. But the channel of Viva of Anatomy came for the rescue just days before the exam. Like, I have done the whole of Gross Anatomy and Osteology revision for the Viva from this channel of Viva of Anatomy. But if you have time, then also try out Viren Karya's Osteology videos. Like, they are the absolute best osteology videos you can ever find anywhere, even better than the paid subscription by KenHub. The only downside that I can think of is that they pack too much information to take it all at one time. So you need to rewatch those videos 2 or 3 times after a time gap. Gland dissection videos used to be the classic of dissection videos, but nowadays you can find more concise and informative videos, so you don't need to search for them. But in case you want to, then Telegram will again come to the rescue. Also, there is a channel called Chaurasia of Medical Literature, which boasts about all the important answers of important questions asked in the exams, like the long and short answer questions, explained in a video format, so it can act as a shortcut for exams, but you won't be able to understand anatomy properly if you have not read throughout the year. Okay, 3D Anatomy Atlas is getting really popular these days. There are 2 apps, Complete Anatomy and Anatomy 3D Atlas, that are quite famous in our college as replacements, like modern replacements of Gross Anatomy Atlas. These apps are really interactive and much more fun to use, and I can really predict them becoming the norm in the future, replacing the Atlas. But now some improvements are required to make the topics quick to review, which is the main purpose of the Atlas. Okay, students also use the website of KenHub to refer answers during the exams. Okay, let's now talk about the must-have books of anatomy. Surprisingly, out of this long list, there are only 3 must-have books. First is the Gray's Anatomy for students for Gross Anatomy. It can also fulfill the needs of an Atlas, so the Atlas is not a must-have if you have done the theory from Gray's Anatomy. The second book is Diffuse for Histology, and the third one is Vishram Singh's Clinical Neuroanatomy. Even Embryology as a whole you can cover from Dr. Ro's videos in case of time shortage. But keep in mind, the more books you read in anatomy, the knowledge piles up and makes your basics of medical science really strong. So apart from these must-have books, you should try out the recommended books too, especially the Atlas and the question books. Okay, let's say you have not read anything in anatomy and there is just a week to the first professional exams. Well, first of all, convey your prayers to the Almighty. Then get a book called Kazi Exam Oriented Anatomy. I haven't tried it, I mean obviously, but as much as I've heard from my friends, it's a very substandard book, like a very average class book you can say, but it works marvelously when it comes to scoring just the passing marks in professional exams. But even if you have done one of the books that I've recommended in this video, then have faith in your long-term memory and don't go for these 100% exam oriented books. They may help in your short-term goals, but in long-term they are of no use at all and are just a time waste. Let's now talk about physiology. Guyton's Medical Physiology is the only gold standard textbook of medical physiology that I know about. Mind it when I say medical physiology, because there are many good books like Vander's and Tortora's Human Physiology when it comes to human physiology, but not in medical physiology. The other big names like Ganong's or BRS or First Aid are review books and not textbooks, so they are out of competition when it comes to recommending books to beginners who want to understand the real physiology of human body and want to explore the abnormalities and disorders of the same. Let's start with saying I prefer the international edition over the South Asian one, because the South Asian edition has a lot of mistakes in it. For example, this line about the genetics of leukocytes in the South Asian edition is completely wrong, and you should verify it from the internet or the Wikipedia. This paragraph is also absent in the original edition. They have added it in the South Asian edition and they have gone wrong with it, and that is why I read the international edition. But there are 2 more things that you should know before deciding whether to read the international edition or the South Asian edition. First, the South Asian one has cut some portions to fit more perfectly into the first MB syllabus, and it is very wisely divided into small competency based chapters provided by NMC for an easy read during the exams. The competency based distribution of the topics is also essential because it helps you to read the competency based chapters from the book according to the topic that is taught to you today in your lectures in university, because they teach you according to the competency syllabus. So unlike myself, I would recommend you to go for the South Asian edition, but refer to the internet for every doubt you have, because it may not just be a doubt, it may be wrong. So here is a short take on how to read Guyton. Read as a textbook and revise as a storybook. If physiology is a story, try to understand every single twist, turn, plot of the story in the first try itself. Don't let a single doubt pass by, but during revision treat it like a storybook. And you already know the plot of the story very well, right? So it is important to just revise the important events in the story so that the whole story could be photocopied to your mind. Basically revise the book through the highlighted portions, diagrams, tables, comparison charts given in the book. Don't go for a paragraph by paragraph reading, else you will not be able to complete the syllabus by your prof exam. And this is for revision. For the first try, read it completely and thoroughly. The methodology is very similar to how you used to read foreign author books in high school, like Campbell or Raven Johnson, but this is where most of the students give up and go for non-standard exam oriented books like Symbolism and all. Trust me, they are no help for concept building, and you have to again go for concept building again in the future through a standard book, or else you won't be able to grasp the concepts of pathology, medicine, etc. in the future years. So it's really important to get a hold of your concepts in first reading of Guyton itself, because first reading is the best reading. You can't go like, I will just skim through this chapter super fast for now, then I will revise it again and again to memorize it. That's not how physiology works, because it is very similar to physics. It may work in anatomy or biochemistry though. In physiology, the concept is the king, not memorization. Having said that, the only reason why Guyton does not guarantee an excellent score in professional exams is because in the subjective questions of the professional exams, you have to make the answers more mark securing and more attractive. For that, you should use flow charts and write the theory in a point-wise manner rather than as an essay, which is very difficult if you have not read an exam oriented book like Symbolism, which is ridiculed with flowcharts. But it's not like you can't score good marks even with essay like answers. You have to focus on making your concepts extra clear and your knowledge stand out in the answers. Like, I am expecting pretty good marks after just revising Guyton for the exams, and so are almost all of my batchmates. So Guyton is definitely an important resource both for concept build-up and for exam purpose. Let's take a quick look at Guyton. So this is what the South Asian edition of Guyton's looks like, and this is a chapter from it. You can see even the small chapters like the ECG getting divided into subsections, and under these subsections are further divisions of topics and subtopics. So yeah, this is about the theory. Furthermore, the chapters are very minutely divided according to the competency syllabus. This is the actual content division. As you can see, these are the competencies, and according to this you will be taught in your lectures in medical school, and you can refer to the chapters in which the competencies have been discussed to continue reading from this book as your lecture progresses in university. So yeah, these are the competencies and this is the chapters. When it comes to revising chapters and topics for an exam that is MCQ based or targets to just test your concepts and nothing else, then Guyton can be an headache because of its repetitive and voluminous theory, where it being created as a storybook poses a major problem for content revision. Instead, what you get is a lot of unnecessary theory and a single concept repeated many times over in the book. At the same time, it misses on some important mentions for the PG exams. Hence, there is a need for a better book to review physiology. To fulfill this need, we have two of the best review books of physiology in our list: Ganong's Review of Physiology and BRS Physiology. Ganong is what we can call a gold standard review book. It does not miss on a single concept, yet the theory is so concise that every single line is basically an important concept. That exact same thing makes the book very difficult to read for the first time, but at the same time makes it very easy to revise if you have gone through it once. Also, I felt like there is much more importance given to the clinical aspect of physiology in Ganong than in Guyton. For example, you have lot of clinical boxes and clinical questions after every section to test your clinical skills. Having said that, we use Ganong as a reference book in first year because it packs much more information in every organ system due to its concise nature, but the same thing makes it very difficult to read for the beginners. But once your basics of physiology is strong, then Ganong will help you review the topics whenever required, be it in the latter part of the first year or in the succeeding years. But for a first year student, a one-liner would be never start with Ganong, because it is a review book, not a textbook. Now, Linda Constanzo's BRS Physiology is the go-to review book of physiology for USMLE because it is not only concise but extremely selective in its content. Just the important chapters have been mentioned throughout the text. The problem section called review test after every chapter, however, is quite extensive. Unlike in anatomy, first aid covers a lot of topics of physiology. Now, talking about lectures, the resources of lectures for physiology is very similar to that of anatomy. I have tried out Kaplan's video lectures physiology once, but I believe that there is not much requirement of lectures in physiology because because the theory itself from textbook is more than sufficient to get a good understanding of the subject. Dr. Najib's lectures on ECG, however, are a blessing for someone who is finding ECG hard to understand. I personally think Guyton is the only must-have book for first year medical physiology. However, the other resources that I just mentioned can be categorized as good to have books instead of just extra books, because the more you read, the knowledge piles up and the revision brushes up your pre-existing understanding of the subject. Talking about biochemistry, the Bible of Biochemistry, Harper's Illustrated Biochemistry, has often been criticized as a book that is so out of syllabus and densely informative that it is of no use for UG students. But let me argue by taking an example. You don't need to understand every step of purine metabolism or purine salvage pathway, but you do need to understand the mechanism of certain well-known enzymes, the dysfunction of which can cause some important diseases. To answer questions like why does the absence or deficiency of HGPRTase enzyme cause an inbar error of purine metabolism called the Lesnian syndrome, what are the symptoms, the treatment, etc. Similarly, there are so many well-known disorders like SCID, gout, etc. related to just purine metabolism, and just like purine metabolism, you need to have a knowledge of all the other biochemical metabolisms to understand the pathology of the related diseases properly. Then only you can proceed with diagnosis and treatment. And no other book gives as much importance to clinical application of biochemistry as Harper does. Reading Harper does consume a lot of time, but is rewarding for sure. Just don't try to memorize biochemistry through Harper. Try to understand biochemistry through Harper, giving more importance to the clinical aspects and the key points of the cycles. You will get time for the memorization part before the exams, and Harper is not the best book for memorization of biochemistry before the exams. The section where Lippincott takes over Harper as the best medical biochemistry textbook are molecular biology and to some extent the vitamins and minerals chapter. Reason is molecular biology is a story, and the easier the story is to understand, the better. In our analogy, it successfully depicts all the key plot points and the names of all key players in our story, as well as giving some attention to the clinical techniques. It is also very exam friendly given its simple language and conceptual approach, which sits really well with molecular biology. Just in case you want to read more of molecular biology, Russell's Genetics may be a good place to start, but there is no need to go to such lengths in medical biochemistry. Trust me, no matter how much you read Harper, you won't be able to answer a single question in professional exams by just reading Harper. For that, you have to remember a lot of stuff just before the exams to boost up your short-term memory, which is, by the way, is the most important asset for your professional exams in biochemistry. Even if you give 2 days each before the part 1 and part 2 of the biochemistry paper to the respective chapters in Vasudevan, you will be able to revise the whole book, including all the metabolic reactions, cycles, disorder and clinical cases. That means you can revise the whole book in just 4 or 5 days if you have read biochemistry properly before. It will be a daunting task, but during the exams our minds are so much focused on the books and our work that we are extremely dedicated to it. So 4 or 5 days are enough to revise all the key points and set it up into your short-term memory for the exams. Also, you will be attending 3 internals in your first year, for which you have to read Vasudevan of respective chapters to pass the exams. So revision during the professional exams is going to be a hell lot easier because you have already read the chapter once from Vasudevan only. Vasudevan is a very exam friendly book because only the important topics have been mentioned, but it's not a gold standard and has its own shortcomings. For example, it has a clinical and applied biochemistry section which digs into the clinical aspect of biochemistry, but in the major chapters like carbohydrate or protein metabolism, the clinical scenarios have not been dealt with justice. Its approach is like just 2 lines on a disease and that's it. Moreover, there are some big mistakes in the book, but after going through books like Harper or Lippincott for the limelight topics, I found Vasudevan really helpful for the exams because you can expand your knowledge by how much you like in biochemistry, but you need something to collect all that knowledge, especially during exams, and this book makes that task a hell lot easier. Just like Vasudevan, there is another book called Satyanarayan that I have not read, but as much as I have heard, it's very similar to Vasudevan except that it's much more detailed and not so much exam friendly. Rajesh Jambulkar's YouTube channel contains the best lectures for professional exams of biochemistry, period. Like literally some of my friends have used just the lectures for revision of biochemistry before the exams and nothing else, so definitely recommended for the exams. Even I have used them before the Vivas for a quick revision. In case you are interested in and want to read more of biochemistry, you may use Leninger's Biochemistry as a reference book, mainly for chapters like protein synthesis or molecular biology. But unless you want to do research in biochemistry in first year or want to pursue a PG in biochemistry, it is not going to make you a better clinician. that's for sure. But I read it because I am kind of crazy when it comes to reading books, like that's my hobby. In fact, I read Leninger in 11th standard itself. You would know if you have watched my IBO guide video. Okay, I don't like to say this, but if you are searching for one single book for entire biochemistry and want to give very little time to biochemistry in first year, then Vasudevan is the book to go for. However, if you are willing to commit some more time to biochemistry in first year, then here is a list of the topics and the books that I would recommend for the topics. Like, read the protein chapter, the enzymes and the metabolisms from Harper. Read DNA from Leninger's, but if time is short, then read it from Lippincott. RNA protein synthesis and gene regulation from Lippincott. Immunity from Levinson, medical microbiology and immunology. It is a microbiology book that you will read in second year, but if you are reading immunity, then it's better to finish it off in first year itself through Levinson. Then the hormones you should read from Harper, but Ganong also has a good chapter of hormones. Then the special topics you can read from Harper, or if you have done Vasudevan, then it's okay. Like, you have to do Vasudevan for the exam, so it's okay if you skip Harper for the special topics. Anyways, that's it for the video, I guess. If you liked it, then like it, because YouTube really pushes it up the algorithm the more the likes you give. And subscribe to my channel, yeah, for more content like this. Okay, bye.